Okay, excuse me. Okay, so Al-Kulaini, 16,000 narrations, he has 28 teachers in his book. From those 28 teachers, 18 of them are anonymous. We have no idea who these people are. 30% of his book is from one person, Ali ibn Ibrahim al-Qummi. We don't really know much about Ali ibn Ibrahim al-Qummi either. We know he's the son of Ibrahim bin Hashim al-Qummi, who's one of the main narrators that came from Kufa to Qom. That's pretty much it. His biography can be summarized in or not, excuse me, not summarized, but his full biography is like 2 sentences or something like that. Very short. And to give you an idea of how different Sahih Bukhari is, Al-Bukhari relies on 300 teachers, or around 300 teachers. I think the exact number is like 293 or something like that. Yeah, so there's a big difference when it comes to the effort put into by each of these two scholars. Al-Kulaini, unlike Al-Bukhari, focuses on all sorts of hadith. He's not just focusing on authentic hadiths. And there have been efforts in recent times by Al-Bahbudi, for example, a modern Shi'i scholar, to categorize, or excuse me, to summarize Al-Kafi and to extract the authentic narrations into a Sahih Al-Kafi, which was later on referred to as Zubdat Al-Kafi. Carrying on, one thing that's really interesting about these two works is the amount of support that Al-Bukhari has in the...
Assalamu alaikum, my good friends. What you've just seen is a excerpt from a video where a popular Salafist internet personality offers his critical assessment of the Shia school of thought and contrasting it with a Sunni approach. And of course, the basis or the perspective that he takes is the perspective of Hadith. He looks at Hadith both in the Shia tradition and in the Sunni tradition, and the part of the video that I looked at, I think at least the 15 minutes or so at the beginning, he basically does a critical analysis of the Shia approach to Hadith. Now, for many observers, or for many neutral students or researchers, the perspective has internal coherency. It makes sense if you make the basis of your worldview, the basis of all your practice, the basis of your knowledge, if you make the basis of everything you know and understand and believe to be athar, to be records, to be books, to be recorded information, then that makes sense. You see, the idea that all knowledge is vested in what can be, as best as possible, related back to a previous time, in particular the 7th century or the 7th till the 9th century. If your religion, if your worldview, if your philosophy, if your outlook, if the basis of all your knowledge, understanding and behavior and action and what you view as sacred is grounded and founded in what can be constructed or related or recorded or connected to the 7th, 8th and 9th centuries, then that indeed is a way of evaluating the Sunni tradition or the Salafist tradition, because Salafist means connected to the Salaf, to the ancient, to the, regarding the ancient as pious and unfailing and righteous. if your idea, if the basis of your understanding is that there existed a pious and sacred and holy ancestry, 1400 or 1300 years old, and that ancestry, that generation, that pious generation, constitutes an ideal model for you to replicate and to construct present knowledge in the year 2023, then it makes sense, if that is your assumption. But that is the problem. That is the problem. That assumption is not tested. And that assumption is not reasonable. And that assumption is not rational. Because what you are saying is that there is a perfect expression of humanness, of humanity, of being a perfectly structured society that existed in the year 600 and 700, current era, and that if our only job as a present generation of 8 billion inhabitants of planet Earth, as 8 billion inhabitants of planet Earth, is it 8 billion? I'm not sure. I think it's going for 8 billions, whatever the number, the population of planet Earth is. As 7 or 8 billion inhabitants of planet Earth, all we need to do is to look at an Arabian case study of the year 613 up till 750, and use that as the ideal model with which to replicate life for the 7 or 8 billion inhabitants of planet Earth. Now, you see, the problem with that assumption is that it is not intuitive. It is not intuitive. If you go with that assumption to any neutral and unattached human being, to any learned person, to any intelligent human being, and you make that proposal, you advance that thesis as the basis on which humanity should be structured, is to replicate a society that existed in a small part of the world, particularly the Arabian Peninsula and slightly beyond, to use that experience as a model with which to structure the entirety of humanity. It will require a lot more than just your assertion. You see, to make that argument, it doesn't immediately come off as intuitive. Because the questions that will be asked, I think the questions that will be asked in terms of that proposal is, how can we analyze the fruitfulness, the success, how thriving was that society? Can we analyze that society and see how thriving that experience was, how conducive that experience was to the human experience? And if we then go and analyze that period of history which the Salafist regards as the pious 150 years, which is the years of the Sahaba, in fact after the death of the Prophet ﷺ, the Tabi'een, in other words those who met the Sahaba but did not meet the Prophet, and the Tabi'een, those who met the people who met the Sahaba but never met the Sahaba or the Prophet. So those 3 generations are the pious generation. It spans maybe about 150 years. And so that is the basis of the entire approach of the Salafist. And I must add that the Salafist approach is the most rational or coherent epistemology, or means towards understanding, or means towards knowledge in the Muslim world. If I have to look, besides the Shia now, if I look at the Baralvi, the Sufi orders, etc., then they just don't have such a robust and coherent understanding of epistemology. Epistemology being the method or the approach to sacralizing or validating what is known. right? But if you really look at the underlying assumptions of the Salaf, then you run into major problems, because it is really premised on the idea that there existed a perfect society. And if we examine that perfect society, it obviously does not represent the perfect human experience. It represents everything that is negative and bad about that can go wrong with the human experience. Civil strife, division, warfare, all of these negative traits, oppression, enslavement, everything that could go wrong, the domination of an elite, all of those are the elements of those 150 years that they regard as the sacred 150 years on which we should base our structure of contemporary society. Now, of course, the argument is that 150 years are really years that were integrally connected to the example set by the Prophet ﷺ. But that's also questionable. You see, the example set by the Prophet was very different from those 150 years. You see, if you look at the basic nature and feel of the Muslim society post the Prophet, and let us go past the first 35 years of rightly guided caliphs. Let us just skip the first 35 years, right after the Prophet. There's the Prophet, which is 26, 23 years, and then there's what is called the Rashidin era, which is about, I think, 35 years. And then you come to this Salafi era, which is the era of the great scholars and of the great muhaddithin and of the empires and so on. But if you look at the nature of that society, it is a society that is very, very little, that has very little resemblance to the era of the Prophet. You see, the era of the Prophet is a period of emancipation, of people coming out of slavery, of people being emancipated from an elite aristocracy, because that is what Arabia was. It was an aristocratic environment. It was an environment where an elite class of businessmen and merchants enslaved the majority of the peninsula and employed the rest of the people in a master plan that really served their entrenchment and their continued advancement. So it was a system, it was a social structure that degraded the majority of people. Now, the Prophet, of course, represents the 23 years of prophethood, especially the Medina period, those 10 years in Medina, represents an emancipation of that social structure, of that structure of exploitation of an elite controlling and dominating the affairs of all of humanity within that area. Right? That is the hallmark of the prophetic era. It more or less is replicated in the post-prophetic Rashidun era to some extent. It continues the emancipation of neighboring countries. Well, there's much to be criticized about that era, which is already not actually perfectly reflective of the prophetic era. But once you move beyond the Rashidun era, then you come to an era which is the Umayyad rulership of Muawiyah, Yazid, Abdul Malik, and all of those, and then also the initial caliphs of the Abbasid, Ma'mun and Mansur and so on, which is in no way resemblant, or has in no way any resemblance to the Prophet. You see, then the process of emancipation had stopped. And the process of re-enslavement, the process of re-establishing an elite had then been in full swing. And what you are telling us, those who are advancing the idea of the pious Salaf, the Salafus Salih, what you are telling us is that there is a way, when we go through all these books, when we take all these books, everything that was written in those 150 years, if we can only gather them and implement them and be servants to these books, if that is all we can do, then we will achieve the perfect society. Now that's of course a lie, you see, because this call of the Salaf is not new. You see, this call that we should derive everything we know, everything we are, from the books of the Salaf, that call is not new. That call was made first by a man by the name of Ahmad ibn Hanbal. Ahmad ibn Hanbal, he's the founder or the key personage in the Hanbali madhab, one of the four madhab of the Sunni. And he compiled every possible piece of narration or narrative from the period, the pious period, from the predecessors. And he compiled his book, Musnad ibn Hanbal. And he was followed by a number of other people. In fact, Bukhari, Muslim, Tirmidhi, whoever, Al-Hakim, Bayhaqi, whatever, all these people. And then also you had the Mufassirin, Ibn Kathir, Qurtubi, Jarir Tabari. All of these were compilers of books and books and books and books and books. And an infinity of books that speak about the time of the Prophet and what the Prophet did. And this is their recipe for the perfect society. If we can only institutionalize, personify these books. Of course, they've been at it for more than 1,000 years. There were societies that tried to emulate these assumptions, that tried to implement these assumptions. We know these societies. The Taliban, ISIS, these are contemporary case studies where communities have tried to implement the books, where they've tried to implement the countless Hadith books, the countless books of Hadith that contain so-called all the solutions for mankind. And so I'm problematizing, I'm questioning the very assumption of these guys, you see. These guys, they make the assumption that all you have to do to make the Sunni a better religion than the Shia is to argue that the Sunni's books are more well-founded, that the books, the athar, or the recorded information in the Sunni books are more qualitatively better established. But that is even a lie. You see, the understanding that Sunni books are somehow better because they have what is called the sanad, which is the unbroken chain of narrators that goes back to the Prophet. That, in fact, is one of the biggest flaws. You see, it's not a science. The science of rijal or jarh and ta'dil is not a science. It's quackery. It's pure quackery. Why am I saying so? And I know this is going to be offensive, but why am I saying so? You see, it's quackery when if you should give that same data to somebody that is unattached to your system, will they come to the same findings? You see, if I give a mathematics problem to two students, all right? If I give a mathematics problem to two students to solve, all right? Bear with me here. Or I give it to a class. If I give I was a mathematics teacher at one stage, okay? So I taught students, and I can speak with authority here. When I gave a mathematics problem to my class of 30 students, I could be guaranteed that maybe 2/3 or more would come back with the same answer and with the same method. All right? Bear with me. That when I give a class of 30 a mathematics problem, if I asked him, listen, what are the roots of this equation, let's say, for example, a square, what are the roots of this particular quadratic equation? If I give them that question, right, I could be guaranteed that 60% of my class, or 2/3 or more, would come back with the same solution, working independently. And that is when you know that you are busy with a science, with a healthy and defensible and legitimate science. Now, if I give all these hadith books, if I gave all these hadith books to 50 sincere but non-Muslim scholars, bear with me here, if I give all these hadith books to 50 non-Muslim scholars but who are sincere, and I give them 2 years, bear with me, this is very, very important. I think you will see the point with this analogy I'm going to make. If I give all these hadith books to 50 independent, sincere, honest, non-Muslim scholars, my question to you is, will they all come up with the same Islam? Will they all come up, at least 2/3 of them, will they come up with the same way of making salah? Will they all come up with the same way of, the same basic ideas, principles, practices, aqidah, whatever? Will they? Will they? You see, if your answer is not a resounding yes, then you are mistaken, then you are dealing with quackery. And why I'm saying it is quackery, the world has been exposed to these thousands of hadith books for 1,000 years. The world, planet Earth, has had access to these thousands and thousands and thousands of hadith books for over 1,000 years now. And no other religion, no other sincere scientist, no other expert has independently vindicated the finding of the Muslim clergy or priesthood. In other words, what you are dealing with is not knowledge, you are dealing with a belief system, with a system of assumptions, with a system that is not kept in place by knowledge and by proofs and by evidence, but it is kept in place by peer pressure. It is a peer engineered system of belief, you see. Now, if you are really confident that your system is defensible, then why do you have to entrench it with the power of the state? You see, there is no Muslim country that I know of, Sunni Muslim country, that does not need the force of the military to keep itself in an ordered and structured way. Yes, you can tell me about Turkey and so on. Turkey is not a Muslim country. Turkey is not implementing in any shape or form the Sunni ideas that you are talking about. You're going to tell me Malaysia. Malaysia is in no way implementing the books. Malaysia with its interest-based banking system. So Saudi Arabia, which is an oppressive dictatorship, in no way reflects the Sunni ethos in these books. So all you had to do to prove that your system makes sense, you had to show us the non-committed part of humanity, the open-minded section of humanity. You had to point us to one working case study where these books have resulted in a perfect, well-functioning society. And you can't. So the basis of your belief system, that the Salaf is Salih, is wrong. The Salaf is not Salih. The second problem is that the praxis, the implementation of your solution, of your idea, is falters. The third one is the validity. In other words, could it be replicated by somebody else as a science? Because that is the meaning of a science. A science, the idea of a science, you see, the basic idea of a science is that you can repeat the process and get the same result. And I've just shown you now that it is impossible to repeat the ilm of jarh and ta'dil and the ilm of the sanad and all these sciences and get to the same results. You can't. So it makes it a system of quackery. It is the same as astrology. It is the same of what is that other thing? Alchemy. You see, alchemy and astrology are dead sciences. They are debunked as sciences. They are forms of quackery. They are incoherent and unrepeatable. If you give two people the same astrological data, they will come to different conclusions, which means it is quackery. The same with alchemy. And so this idea of jarh and ta'dil and hadith being a science it is bunk. You know, it is complete unsubstantiated position that is only advanced by peer pressure and by the force of coercion. Now, let's just quickly come to the criticism that was made about the Shia books. You see, the Shia, what the guy in the beginning has not mentioned is actually that the Shia is not a Salafist school. You see, the Sunni Salafist is a Salafist school. It believes, or it is a Atharist. Atharist means connected to recorded or transmitted information. Now, the Shia is not built only on transmitted hadiths and information. So your criticism should not be located from the perspective of Athar, because the Shia is not founded in Athar. You see, the Shia, and I'm saying this as a non-Ithna Ashari. I'm speaking to you as a non-committed Muslim, as a Muslim that has got certain acceptance of certain ideas within the broader ambit of Islam, but are not committed to a particular school. So I can come from a very independent perspective, and I need to defend the Shia in this point, is that the Shia does not found itself within Athar. You see, the Shia is primarily founded in the Qur'an, and then they are very, very importantly, they are a rationalist school. So the Shia, and in all its formations, the Zaydi Shia and especially the Imami Ithna Ashari Shia, they very, very firmly entrench or very firmly embrace the idea of rationalism. So in other words, the idea of imamat or leadership is not founded in the Athar, in the Hadiths. You see, that is just one means of corroboration. But really the idea of an imamat, of a system of wilayat, of a system of loyalty to leadership, is really founded in the Qur'an. Because it is in the Qur'an that you find the ideas of wilayat. And you see, if you look at the verses that Sunni Muslims regard as the basis for the Sunnah, and I'm explaining, just to enlighten, you who are subscribers on the channel or anyone else, to open your mind to think a bit broader than what you are fed, the nonsense that you are fed. So the verses in the Quran that actually that call for obedience to the Prophet, right? And those are verses like Surah 4, 80, reading as follows: obedience to the messenger is obedience to God. As for those that are averse, do know that we have not tasked you with an accountability for them. So what the Shia is doing, and this is to explain to you that to simply state everything in terms of Athar is unfair to the Shia. What the Shia is doing, and I repeat, I'm doing this as an independent student of religion, right? What the Shia is doing is they regard these verses that speak to obedience to the Prophet, they regard any just leader that emerges post the prophetic era as worthy of that same amount and type of obedience. Do you get what I'm saying? So the idea of imamat, of wilayat, because wilayat is righteous command, right? That is what wilayat is. Wilayat means righteous command from the Qur'an. And what the Shia is saying is not that they base it on the Hadiths, but that they base it on the Qur'an. The Qur'an enjoins, makes it compulsory for the generation who lived with the Prophet to regard him as the righteous authority. Do you understand what I'm saying? So the generation that surrounded the Prophet had to, in terms of the instruction from the Qur'an, had to accept his leadership unquestionably. If you look at these verses, do not regard an appeal by the messenger. So what the Shia does is, they read all these verses that speak about the eminent position of the Prophet. They raise that in they raise the righteous leader to that station worthy of obedience. Now, yes, the Sunnis will also make that call in fact. You see, they will also regard obedience to the Caliph Muawiyah, Caliph Yazid, Caliph Abdul Malik. They also regard obedience to the Caliph as sacred. But how can you sacralize obedience to a corrupt Caliph? How can you how can you regard the words of God? Their commitment to truth is not until they allow you to govern their affairs and until they accept your judgment without any reservation. How can you make the unjust or the unjust Caliph worthy of the same type of obedience? And so what the Shia does is, the Shia puts forth an argument that if we are to extend those verses to the post-prophetic era, if we are to extend that level of civil obedience to civil authority, if we are to extend those verses, which the Sunni does in any case, you see, the Sunni does enjoin obedience to the Caliph, but the problem with the Sunni expression of the Caliph or the Imam or the Wali is that they have no qualitative requirements for their Waliul Amr, the owner of governance or of command. So the Sunni says, yes, we need to have obedience, these verses make sense, but there are no qualifications for the Ulil Amr, for the holder of command. Whereas the Shia says, if we are to follow these verses, if these verses are to be kept alive through the ages, then the Waliul Amr must be invested with certain traits and certain qualities. And that is the rational approach which the Shia establishes towards the idea of wilayat or imamship. So for these guys to then bring the argument that the Shia is weak because they don't believe in the Athar, or their Hadiths are weak, you are basically reducing the Shia's epistemology. You see, you are trivializing the epistemology of the Shia, and that would be an unfair way then of drawing the comparison, because you've simplified Shia epistemology to Sunni or to Salafist epistemology, and you can't do that. That would be unfair. And for that reason, I say to you that, you see, it is easy for you as unsuspecting, innocent YouTube viewers to be captivated by these false messiahs, by these liars, and who come and sell you a bill of goods and who tell you that the gold standard is the Salaf, the gold standard for truth is the Athar, the gold standard for truth is the Sanad. You see, there's many other weaknesses in that argument that I haven't even come to, because the Sanad is based on the Adala of Sahaba, and the Adala or the blemish-free nature of the Sahaba is an illogical assumption. The unblemished nature of the Sahaba is an illogical and is an anti-Quranic assumption, because the Qur'an does make the point that there are in the community of Muslims those that are not truly Muslim, that are not truly surrendered to the way of the Prophet. The Qur'an makes that claim at countless times in chapter 9. Go and read Surah Ahzab, I think, or Surah Tawbah, I'm not sure. Go and read it, chapter 9, and you see how often the Qur'an identifies a section of the Muslims that are unreliable, that are dodgy, that are ambiguous in their loyalties. So if they existed there with the Prophet, why do we make the assumption that suddenly when the Prophet died, they all lost their ambiguity, they all became beautiful, pristine, clear Sahaba? It's illogical. 120,000 people cannot be blemish-free, because then they wouldn't be human beings, then they would be angels. So they could tell lies. So the other premise of the Salaf, that all Sahaba, whatever a Sahaba spoke, is the truth, that is even more extreme than the Shia. You see, that is even more. You see, the Shia gives that privilege to 12 people or 14 people, not to 120,000 people. That privilege of truthfulness and adala is given to 14 people. They call them ma'sumin, which means they were generally in their nature, they were free of the regular defects that human beings have. So I'm offering you this so that you can understand that the idea of truth and what is real is not something that we can draw from by using a truckload of books, but truth is better arrived at when we do what human beings do best, and that is use our aql, because that is the gift. The gift is not that truckload of books. The gift is the aql. You try and make your child a good person by giving him a gift of all those books and see if he goes anywhere. It's a fallacy, it's a farce, and the real solution lies in using our aql and drawing from the only divine authorized book, Al-Qur'an. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen.